G'day, May 40 here. So why do you think Kamala Harris is so eager for another debate? Right? If she clearly had this election in her pocket, as many pundits and experts and Democrats and figures in the mainstream media complain, why would Kamala Harris be so eager for another debate? And the reason she's so eager for another debate is that she knows that she's losing. And you say, what the heck? What the heck, 40? I've seen the polls. Right? I've heard about the polls. I know that Kamala Harris has this huge lead, that she has transformed her unpopular ratings to popular. Now, even with Trump on the economy, and you've got 700 national security experts proclaiming that Kamala Harris is their choice. We've got poll after poll showing Kamala Harris dominating. But number one, not all polls are created equal, right? There are high-quality polls, and there are high-quality academic research papers, and there are low-quality polls and low-quality research papers. Now, the highest quality poll is the New York Times poll, which essentially shows Donald Trump tied or in the lead in all the battleground states, and that just so happens to coincide with what the private polls show. Now, what the heck are the private polls? The private polls are the polls commissioned by the warring parties, and they don't make these public. And these polls are much more detailed, right? They are much higher quality than the public polls. And what the private polls show for both Kamala Harris and for Donald Trump is that Trump is poised to win this election, and it's not clear that Kamala Harris has even a chance. Now, Donald Trump can't lose this election, right? He's so incredibly self-destructive that without a doubt, Donald Trump can lose this election. But it does not appear right now that Kamala Harris is capable of winning this election because she's so inauthentic. She is reluctant to be interviewed. She's reluctant to give any details about her policies for her 4 years as president of the United States. And she's just not winning over the voters that she needs to win over. So what the heck am I talking about? All right, let's get some analysis here from Mark Halperin this morning.
By the end of the day to get ready for the UN meetings. All right, guys, the big polls over the weekend that got so much attention. One, an NBC News poll, the national poll. I continue to not understand national polls. But
okay, NBC News, not a high-quality poll.
NBC News national poll showing Harris up big. And then out this morning, New York Times polls.
So all those polls that show Kamala Harris up big, they are low-quality polls. All right, I could go out, right, as a 58-year-old man, and I could go to a bar and I could find a woman to go to bed with, but in all likelihood, she wouldn't be very high quality. On the other hand, I can use good discretion and choose someone at my level who is of much higher quality. And so you can wrap your feelings around these low-quality polls showing Kamala Harris with these big leads. But the high-quality poll, the New York Times poll, and the private polls for both Donald Trump and for Kamala Harris shows Trump has the edge in the key battleground states.
There you see them in 3 of the 4 South Sunbelt battlegrounds, with Trump having a lead. Now, as I was told a month ago by the Trump people, they're not necessarily right, but the Times poll reflects reality, and it matches up. Some private polling suggests that what they forecast a month ago, which is that over time, once the Harris honeymoon ended, that she would fall back to where Joe Biden was before the Biden-Trump debate, which is to say behind sufficiently in the 4 Sunbelt states that are a path to victory, was winning Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Nebraska too. If the Republicans change the rules in Nebraska, that would lead her with no paths. Doesn't mean the Trump people are right. But if you do, as I do, we just talk to both sides and credit those who are making arguments as possibly right. Sean, is it possible that we're right where the Republicans said we'd be, based on the Times poll, that Donald Trump is pulling the Sunbelt states back and she's going to have a very narrow single path and maybe no path?
Yeah, I mean, look, the key thing in that poll that I think is interesting is that it's Trump's at 50 in Arizona, 49 in Georgia, 49 in North Carolina. You really want to be at 50 to start to feel a little bit of ease. Still in the margin of error in both Georgia and North Carolina, but this is exactly what they've been saying all along. And I don't think it's a stretch to think that those 3 states in particular, who have a history of voting Republican, Georgia and Arizona in particular, come back home, right? They were anomalies, extremely close last cycle. So that's not, the North Carolina, I think, will continue to be close. But the bottom line is, if you take those 3 states, which I do think Trump will, all you need is one in that blue wall. So Michigan, Wisconsin, or Pennsylvania, I'm particularly bullish on Pennsylvania. But the bottom line is, that's, if he picks off one more state, he wins. And that's the key thing, the Trump victory. And it's not just, he can go Wisconsin, he can go any of the 3, and that gives him, that puts him back in the White House. She needs to get everything. And that's the difference when it comes to the Electoral College, is that it's a much better road for him than it is for her right now.
Yeah. Tim, on Wednesday, the vice president, Reuters says, is giving a big economic speech.
So you start a new job, you get an employee handbook, and what's going to be most crucial, most important, most useful for you in understanding how your business works, what your responsibilities are, right? What's most important? What's the key to succeeding at your workplace, right? Is it going to be in the employee handbook? No, it's not going to be in any public documents, right? The real truth about how your business works, you will learn if you have good relations with your coworkers, and they will tip you off to how things work. So there's public presentation. Right, you go to the New York Times, LA Times, NBC News, CNN, and you get a public presentation of what's going on in the world, which is usually coming down from various bureaucracies. But if you have access to people in the know, right, they can give you private information that will be far superior to what you get in the news. If you really know a topic and then you see a news story about the topic, you will find innumerable inaccuracies in that news story. And so expertise, private information, right, being connected to people in the know, right, this will tell you far more than public presentations on CNN. And recognizing the difference between a high-quality reporter, a high-quality analyst, a high-quality academic study, a high-quality poll, and variants that are much trashier. That's incredibly important. Do I give any credence to the polling of Jews in New York? Polling of Jews in New York shows that Donald Trump has a higher percentage of the Jewish vote in New York than anything seen in at least 40, if not 80 years. So Trump essentially has a majority of Jewish votes in New York. He even got that Muslim mayor to endorse him. All right, so 6 hours after this Mark Halperin show, he did a much more sophisticated edition, and this was his show that came across at 3 p.m. Eastern.
Where she's expected to unveil her economic agenda in more detail. Thursday, 2 events in Washington. One, meeting with President Zelensky, along with President Biden, and then doing an event with President...
Right, they're trotting Vladimir Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, out essentially as a Harris campaign prop, and they are boasting that they've got IRS workers endorsing Kamala Harris. I don't think these will be powerful factors for her.
Biden on gun violence. And then Friday, she's in Arizona and then San Francisco. Saturday, fundraising in San Francisco, and then traveling to LA. And then Sunday, she is in Los Angeles and Nevada for a political event. Noah, do we have that San Francisco vintage picture? If we do, I'd love to share
great
that now.
story here in the New York Times.
San Francisco. We'll get to it.
Great story in the New York Times about the relationship between Kamala Harris and Kimberly Guilfoyle. And it shows Kamala Harris is an incredibly petty and deceptive woman who apparently was quite threatened by Kimberly Guilfoyle. And Harris did everything she could to see that Kimberly Guilfoyle would not get hired in the San Francisco District Attorney's Office.
When do we have it? I think we do. All right, tell me when we have it. All right, Donald
there
Trump.
We go.
Here we go.
Oh wait, so there's Gavin Newsom.
So there's a great article in the New York Times
Kimberly
today about the origins of the relationship.
So Kimberly Guilfoyle was a great prosecutor. Kamala Harris never showed herself as a great prosecutor. Kimberly Guilfoyle could argue the heck out of a case. Kamala was adequate, but she never put up a performance as good as what Kimberly Guilfoyle did with regard to those dogs that killed somebody in San Francisco, and that got a ton of media attention, and Kimberly Guilfoyle led the prosecution.
Between Kimberly Guilfoyle and Kamala Harris when they both worked for the San Francisco DA's office. And here you can see the two of them in the center there, and then the foreground, I don't know who that handsome young man is, but there's a striking resemblance to Gavin Newsom, who, of course, at one time was married to Kimberly Guilfoyle. The three of them working at a Thanksgiving Day dinner, or prepping dinner for the less fortunate. And it's a great story. If you're interested in their relationship, the history of their relationship, it's a great piece. I recommend it, but this photo is a winner. I thought I'd share that. All right, Donald Trump, week ahead. Today, as we said, he's in Pennsylvania. Tomorrow, Savannah, Georgia. Wednesday, Mint Hill, North Carolina. And then Friday, 2 events in Michigan in Walker and Warren. So they both stepped up their schedules somewhat this week, befitting the fact of where we are in the cycle. Still no word on whether there'll be a debate or not. I remain skeptical, but you never know. Now, main thing I want to share about my report.
Okay, so why is Mark Halperin skeptical that there will be another debate? Because he recognizes that Donald Trump does not need another debate. And Donald Trump recognizes that he does not need another debate. And Kamala Harris desperately does need another debate.
Reporting is regarding the battleground states. And you've seen this morning, the New York Times battleground state polls for 3 of the 4 Sunbelt states with Donald Trump ahead within the margin of error. Here's some more polling that came out a little later, or earlier today, a little later than the Times polls. These are from Emerson and The Hill. Let's go ahead and put up the first batch. And as you can see here, Trump, again, all of these are margin error. Let's stress that. Trump 3, Georgia. Trump 1, Wisconsin. Trump 1, Arizona. Trump 1, Pennsylvania. Change. Trump tied Nevada, 1 up, 1 in North Carolina, down 2 in Michigan. So where do we stand with the battleground states? From talking to people with private data, which is, as we always discuss here, more robust, better done than the public, almost all the public data. What's clear is, as I said for a while.
Right. Generally speaking, in life, the private data is much better, much more precise, much more valuable than the stuff that's released publicly.
That it is unlikely that Vice President Harris can put any of the 7 states out of reach, with the possible exception of Michigan, and the Trump people dispute that will happen. All 4 of the Sunbelt states, possible that they could be put, not with huge margins, but back to the Trump camp, which is where they were pretty decisively when Joe Biden got out of the race. And if they do that, again, as we've discussed many times, at least Kamala Harris with exactly one path to the Electoral College victory of exactly 270. Now, I'm not predicting that'll happen. I'm not saying it has happened, but I did report about a month ago that that's what was expected to happen by the Trump folks, that after the initial surge by Vice President Harris, when she entered the race, when she had such a successful and press-assisted start, that she'd be able to make all 7 states competitive, but that over time they thought the Sunbelt states would drift back their way. That may or may not be happening. You certainly see it to some extent in the Times poll. The Emerson polls don't dispute that. But I will tell you again that the Democratic private polls are more in line with where the Trump private polls are than they are with the public polls. Doesn't mean they think they're behind everywhere, but it does mean that they think that there's a chance that those Sunbelt states are going to be very difficult to win. And if that's the case, then there's some worry on the Democratic side.
You're going to get different in every poll.
Hold on 1 second. Let's see if we can see where we can find where that's coming from. There we go. If that is the case, then the Democrats are going to have a difficult time figuring out how to keep a second path in play, and which of the 4 to try to fight back in. Now, the good news for the vice president is she has so much money in her campaign coffers, so much money from the outside groups that she can compete in all 7.
I'm just curious as to why that would be.
Noah, can you find that for me? I'm having trouble finding where that's coming from. There we go. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about this dynamic, and what's fueling concern on both sides is the uncertainty, because the reality is no one knows who's going to win. And the other thing that's fueling it is the mixed data that people pour over and try to find holes in the polls that they don't like. It's not just human nature, but particularly for people who are frontward facing, public facing, to spin the bad polls, to try to point out flawed methodology, to point out other polls that don't show the same thing. But what I have found in the last week, about a week, is a much more negative private sense from people on both sides, but particularly on the Democratic side, but not exclusively, as to where things stand. And a concern that this persistent thing that we've discussed many times on this platform, that Vice President Harris isn't doing enough to show folks the specifics of what she do as president, and that she's not super liberal, that there's concern that the efforts to do that are not vigorous enough. And for instance, if you look at the Oprah event, which by some measures of communication was very successful, very little there that put more detail out. Now, she is supposed to be giving a speech on Wednesday, and we'll see how that goes. There is the promise from her communications team of more interviews, more public events. But the general worry among some Democrats is that she's not really trying to address these concerns. She's simply trying to create the appearance of addressing these concerns, and that's not good enough to win. And that their suspicion is that on the campaign side, they do think it's good enough to win. Now, there's 2 criticisms which have been raised here before of that point of view. One is Donald Trump's not particularly specific on a range of issues. And number 2, as Stephanie Rule said, there are some Democrats who say we don't care about being specific, we just need to win, and no one should vote for Donald Trump whether he's specific or not.
Donald Trump is a known quantity. All right, we had 4 years of Donald Trump as president, so you have a rough approximation of the type of economic policies that he'll pursue.
Those concerns, I know people have them, or those positions, I know people have them. But as I said earlier on the morning meeting, you can have those positions, but it doesn't mean Kamala Harris is going to win. And it could mean she's making a mistake in the way she's approaching this. So, as I said, there's also concern on the Republican side. I know there's a range of people I talk to on a regular basis and ask them, how do you think things are going? And whether they're super MAGA or simply for Trump because they're not for Harris, there's definitely more concern in the last week. And of course, that's driven by some of the public data, but it's also driven by, I believe, that the Trump's performance is so inconsistent. There's so many things he does that are antithetical to trying to win, either because they're unfocused or they're also off message, that they believe he may be blowing it, that the mirror image of those believe the vice president may be blowing the election, believe Trump may be blowing the election. But there's a difference, a qualitative difference. The Republicans believe if Trump can just string together a good final several weeks, he can win. The belief on the Democratic side, for those who are skeptical of the vice president from the Democratic side, they believe that she's not capable of doing what needs to be done. And they're very concerned that over time, there's going to be...
So Donald Trump is capable of operating in a disciplined fashion on the campaign trail. He did it at the close of 2016, and he won. Right, the last 3 weeks of the 2016 campaign, Donald Trump was on target, highly disciplined. But with regard to 2020, he was all over the map. He ran a sloppy, undisciplined campaign, and he lost. And so if the race is close, all right, a disciplined Trump should win.
A failure to do what needs to happen. So that's kind of my table set here. Let me bring in a couple people and ask them what they think. I want to start with Melissa.
Passionate, was off prompter when she talked about civil rights and when she talked about bones. I spoke to a lot of people who were in the New York Fund.
And ask them what they think. I want to start with Melissa DeRosa, who's a Democrat. I'm going to add her in. Melissa, how would you appraise your level of concern about how
All right, this is a Democratic strategist.
aggressive the vice president's being in trying to address the concerns about policy and fitness?
I am very concerned. I mean, the problem for Kamala Harris is she's weeks behind. I would have argued that coming out of Labor Day, she needed to start doing policy speeches and putting meat on the bones. I spoke to a lot of people who were in the New York fundraiser yesterday where, yes, she raised a tremendous amount of money, but hardcore Democrats who were spending a ton of money to be in that room left feeling like there were no meat on the bones on her economics. They said she was very passionate, was off prompter when she talked about civil rights and when she talked about abortion, but when she moved to the economy, it felt very flat. She was not talking like she was speaking off of a teleprompter, and people left really underwhelmed. And I got a bunch of emails from folks saying, oh, you know, apparently she's going to give a speech this week. The problem is they've now sort of allowed this narrative to harden where she doesn't have anything specific on policy, to the point where Stephanie Rule and others are actually publicly saying it doesn't matter, we shouldn't care, it just is about beating Donald Trump. Well, the people who care are the undecideds in the 7 states that are going to decide the election. So now I fear that whatever she says on Wednesday, the bar is going to be set to a place where she's not going to be able to jump over it. Nothing will be good enough, and there's going to continue to reinforce going into October that she's an empty suit. And the vibe election was okay in August and the beginning of September, but now that the sentiment is sort of settling to the bottom, people want to know, what are you going to do? And I think Trump, who's 78 years old, is out campaigning her physically. You know, he's out in Pennsylvania doing 2 events today. She was in New York yesterday. You're in New York. Why didn't you also make a stop in Pennsylvania? The calendars are, you know, it's great you're sitting on Oprah's couch. It makes me feel like a lot of Hillary Clinton type mistakes. Celebrities, fundraising, money can do it, when at the end of the day, that's not what's going to get it done. It feels like Trump's campaign understands better how to get it done. They just have a worse candidate who can't stay on message. So I am deeply concerned. I think we are back to where the Sunbelt states will go to Trump. I'm wondering if in November, we're all going to look back and say not picking Shapiro was the biggest mistake for the party if Pennsylvania ends up going the wrong way and we don't get this. So I think that we've got to turn it around and turn it around fast.
I want to bring Vin Weber in one moment, but Melissa.
Okay, just looking at Donald Trump, I mean, he looks incredible for 78. Only president who didn't age
let's
in
go
office.
to Mar-a-Lago, Donald. I love the place so much. You know, she used to love me, but once I ran for politics, that was the end of that, and that was okay with me. I couldn't care less, because we got to make our country great again. We're going to make it great again, greater than ever before. But Oprah would ask just a simple question, and you get this crazy answer, or you don't get any answer. Just, this is not a president. We had 4 years of this. We're not going to have 4 more years. We won't survive it. I also want you to promise to find at least one voter and get them out to the polls. Find these people. There's so many people. If everybody votes, you know, it's interesting. Christians, we got to get the Christians to vote. You know, I don't know what it is. Relatively, they don't vote a lot. They go to church and they love church, and that's great, but we got to get Christians, evangelicals, we have to get them out to vote. We have to get gun owners. You know, gun owners don't vote. They don't vote.
Yeah, it's incredible. This guy can speak off the cuff with very few, if any, notes for an hour and a half. Just a real warrior.
When you look at the public data and whatever private data you've heard about, do you agree with the Trump folks that the Sunbelt states look to be headed his way in a decisive way, like all 4 of them, or not all 4 of them?
I don't think, look, I think Georgia is going to be close. I also think North Carolina is going to be close. So I think that we're going to have to keep an eye. Like, I don't think he has them in the bag, but where we're standing right now, I think that they have a, to use your phrase, small but durable lead that you see repeatedly that she can't crack. And I think that, you know, history shows he's going to be able to hold on to that. And so I think that he's going to have those. And then it's just about Pennsylvania. And he's acting like he understands that, right? He's spending his time in the right places. And he goes out to Michigan Michigan last week, and whether or not it would create extra inflation on its own, whether or not this is based in reality, he says to the UAW crowd, we're going to increase tariffs on Mexican cars 200%. At least he's saying something specific to an audience to whom that matters, and that's what she's missing right now. And so I don't understand the strategy. Money is great; it's not going to be enough, and I think we've got to get more in the game here in terms of how we're connecting with the actual voters who are going to decide this election.
And I'd love to hear you talk first about what Melissa's critique about Harris, and I'd like to talk to you about Trump.
You sort of sidelined me, Mark, because I agree with everything Melissa said. I mean,
Yeah.
I think she analyzed this really, really very well. I think that the narrative is going very much in an unsustainable direction. I'll put it that way for Harris. I think it's gotten. She could have corrected it sometime over the last few weeks if she'd done something to. And the trite phrase is a sister soldier moment, and I don't mean to say exactly like that, but something that would have disrupted this narrative and given her a chance to continue to just build on the wave that she established out of the Democratic convention, and that Trump failed to take advantage of coming out of the Republican convention on his side. But she didn't do that, and I think now it's kind of same old. Oh yeah, she's not going to talk about anything, and now she has a very high bar to change people's minds about whether or not she really has something to say. And the only thing that's left is Trump going to be able to put an ideological bent on this beyond just saying she doesn't have anything to say, that she would do the wrong thing. If you'll allow me a horrible attempt at phrase making, Mark, and you know me a long time, I usually don't do this, but in 1964, when I was a 12-year-old teenage Republican, Barry Goldwater's phrase was, in your heart, you know he's right, and the Democrats said far right. The phrase in this election is becoming, for the Democrats, Biden's gone, she's all that's left, and the Republicans' rejoinder is far left. This is an election that it's Trump's to lose, to coin a trite phrase, and he could well lose it if he doesn't get his act together. And I don't know him well. I don't know him at all. So I don't know why he can't sort of.
Well, I think Trump's mind should be sharpened by the fact that if he loses, he'll likely spend the rest of his life in jail.
Psychologically discipline himself to get this together when it's an election that's right there for him to win. But yes, Republicans are very worried about that.
Now, I think generally people believe it's at this point, because of what's happened in Montana, it's almost a certainty that Republicans will take the Senate. The House, though, seems more up in the air, and you both follow the House pretty closely. My sense from talking to people in both parties now is, while it's more likely than not that the party that wins the White House takes the House, in the case of Republicans, keep the House, most people I've talked to so far this week say that's not a sure thing in their view. That Democrats, for instance, could take the House even if Trump wins, and vice versa. Do you both agree with that?
I do. I think that you're going to see some people who vote for Trump in ticket split, who will feel a little bit more comfortable if the Democrats are in charge of the House, or vice versa. And so, I mean, I'm seeing it even in New York. There are a handful of battleground states that I'm keeping a very close eye on. As we know, New York and California are the reason we lost the House in 2022. And while New York is going to solidly go for Harris, this is not going to be a single digit race like it was looking when it was Trump Biden. I think she's going to comfortably win with 15, 16, 17 votes. I think that the Republicans are still going to hang on to at least 3, 4, 5 of those seats that are up for contention. So I do think that there's going to be a fair amount of ticket splitting.
I agree with that. And it could go either way. There are a few seats that are on the cusp, if you will, a few seats where Republican incumbents should be able to hold on, but have created problems for themselves. But by and large, Republicans were quite pessimistic 7, 8 months ago. They became more optimistic over the course of the year because of very concrete things like redistricting in different places and things like that. But it's not anywhere near the notion of saying Republicans are confident they're going to hold the House. They're not. They think it could go either way. But if you're the average nonpartisan American, the most discouraging thing is everybody I talk to on both sides, and I do talk to people on the Democratic strategic side, believes that whoever runs the House is going to run it by 5 votes or less. And that's for a country that has been exhausted with partisanship and the divisions in the House of Representatives when the Republicans are in control. That's not a very good outcome.
Yeah, and a huge challenge for her if she's facing an all-Republican Congress, the opposite of incoming presidents typically have, which is a Congress controlled by their own party for those first few years. I mean, I don't know how much discussion there'll be of that, but it'll be quite a presidency for her first 2 years. She's dealing with a Republican speaker and a new Republican majority leader who's going to have to figure out how to do the job, and the MAGA base will be looking to that person to stop everything.
And in the face of the likelihood that her first midterm election will be good for Republicans. That's based on
that's right.
Yeah,
based on it. That's exactly right. And the map's not horrible for them as this cycle, but it's not super great on the Senate side. And of course, confirmations alone, the challenge for her, who's never, who's been thrust into this. Yes, she's been vice president for almost 4 years, but the challenge for her to just get cabinet appointees confirmed. MAGA will be furious if she wins. They'll demand that the new majority leader not let her put in super liberal people into the cabinet. She'll be pressured on her left to put in super liberal people. And how she would deal with just getting a Pentagon secretary and a secretary of state and attorney general, treasury secretary confirmed, even if she doesn't choose super left people, I think it's going to be would just be a huge challenge for her.
To say the fact that, right out of the gate, the Trump tax package expires and you're going to have to renegotiate the tax code. So it's going to be a mess.
And one solution, if she faces that, I think the confirmation thing is a big problem.
All right, so a lot of discussion in the mainstream media is what the heck is Israel's strategy? Well, I think Israel's strategy is becoming pretty clear. It is just to beat the hell out of Hezbollah. And they have now killed all of Hezbollah's senior leadership, except for Nasrallah at the top. All right, they've killed all of the senior military leadership. So do you know who is running Hezbollah, the terrorist operation right now, right? It's all the people that Hezbollah did not think were worthy of having a pager last week, right? They were so inconsequential to Hezbollah last week that they weren't even considered to be worthy of a pager. And for the last 2 months, last 6 weeks in particular, Israel is just steadily escalating. And now they are just beating the hell out of Hezbollah. Right, they destroyed about 10% of Hezbollah's total military capacity just today alone. And Iran was talking a big game, but did absolutely nothing. And Hezbollah talks a big game, but does absolutely nothing. Right, Hezbollah and Iran's responses to being humiliated day in and day out by Israel are pathetic. And so it's a strategy to slaughter your enemy. It's a really good strategy to maim your enemy. And the New York Times analyzes, oh, Israel thought that it could intimidate Hezbollah, but that's not working. Yeah, Hezbollah's sending over a few rockets, but they almost all get knocked down by Israel's defenses. Hezbollah just looks pathetic, and the rest of the Arab world is laughing at Hezbollah. We know that the Arab world loves to go with the strong horse. Well, who's the strong horse here? It's Israel. Right? Hezbollah looks pathetic. Iran looks pathetic. Iran can't even protect visiting Hamas leaders who come to a funeral in Tehran, and Iran puts them up in sleek protected conditions, and they are blown to pieces. So here's one of Hezbollah's famous mouthpieces going live on the air, and he gets hit. So he's about to tell us about Hezbollah's victories. Right, tell us all about Hezbollah's magnificent victories. Okay, no update on his situation, but he's going to tell us all about the ongoing victories of Hezbollah. Okay, what's the scariest part of working for Hezbollah? Getting promoted. Right after Israeli strike hits Hezbollah stockpile, the munitions cook off in all directions. So Hezbollah practices by storing munitions in civilian areas, right? Hezbollah, Hamas, right? They do all they can to get their own people killed, right? That's the essential part of the Hezbollah and Hamas strategy, and of Arab Muslim terrorist groups in general. Key part of their strategy is, let's get our own people killed so that the world will feel sorry for us. It doesn't seem like a winning strategy to me. I mean, if you're on the left, you'll probably find that incredibly convincing. But Hezbollah, Hamas, and other Islamic terrorist groups, they deliberately store munitions with civilians, they hide among civilians, and they do everything they can to get their own people slaughtered and hope that the world will then feel sorry for these losers. I almost feel sorry for Hezbollah. They spent 18 years since the Second Lebanon War preparing for this day. They dug bunkers, they dug tunnels, they turned bedrooms into missile silos, they turned mosques into fortifications. And how's that working out?
This is a village in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah stores cruise missiles, rockets, launchers, and UAVs inside civilian homes, hidden behind the Lebanese population living in the village. We are monitoring these activities, locating the weapons, and destroying them with precise intelligence-based strikes. I want to show you an example of a strike carried out a few weeks ago. Here we are exposing Hezbollah's method of hiding a cruise missile inside a home. The terrorists create a designated opening for the missile launch. Here you can see how we identified the terrorist making an opening in the building that exposed the missile. In a precise strike, the IDF eliminated the terrorist and this missile launching infrastructure shortly before the launch.
I mean, who's your daddy now? The fact is that Iran and Russia and China are quite inept compared to the United States. And Hezbollah is not exactly setting the world on fire. Right, they've got concealed firing positions under bushes across Lebanon's hills and in the Bekaa Valley. So let me get back here to this Twitter thread that I want to show you. Right, they carefully distributed these weapons, but in those 18 years, Israel has been working too, and the technological advances in that time have vastly increased Israel's edge, because there's about single standard deviation. There's about a 15 to 25 point IQ difference between Hezbollah fighters and Israeli fighters, right? There's no doubt they have centimeter level 3D models of every building in Lebanon, right? On these maps, the entrances to all of Hezbollah's secret hideouts would light up like Christmas trees. It's trivial to track changes in these maps. When a farmhouse is extended, when new tracks appear in a wood, the changes show up bright. Like the French in the 1930s, Hezbollah prepared for the last war. It turns out they built a modern Maginot Line. They are cooked. As their civilian human shields head north, leaving them exposed, Hezbollah's fighters will now be scrambling through the brush and across the hills, unable to safely use roads and with no way to contact each other. They'll desperately try to reach whatever rockets they can, fire whatever rockets they can, only to ineffectually fire at Israel and get slammed back. They'll be tracked by Israel's endless eyes in the sky, and they'll be eliminated along with their rockets. I mean, look at all these people heading north in Lebanon. Can Israel sufficiently reduce the Hezbollah threat with targeted airstrikes alone and avoid a ground war? In the past, this would have been impossible, even with carpet bombing. However, with the new technology and complete air superiority, Israel may be able to keep their enemy pinned down from the air, slowly degrading them into the dust. If the Israelis do need to go in, it might be sufficient to cut off Hezbollah's heartland in the south on the Bekaa Valley, and thus their resupply from Iran, just as was done to Hamas at Rafah, sealing their demise. It might even be possible to achieve this from the air alone. And by the way, what exactly is Hamas up to these days? Hamas is doing nothing because Hamas has been smashed. Lebanon's geography makes this feasible. It is split north-south by mountains and east-west by 12 large canyons. There are no more than 7 bridges across each canyon. There are minimal passes through the mountains. Israel would just need to pick a river, make it impossible for Hezbollah with a few bombs. With careful monitoring, Hezbollah's southern activities would dry up and fizzle out. The Litani River probably is not far enough north as it bisects Hezbollah's Shia heartlands. Parts of it are less than 10 kilometers from Israel. Don't be surprised if the bridges on these other Lebanon rivers go kaboom. The Israelis do go in. It might simply be to take up positions on the lightly populated, mostly Druze western reaches of Mount Hermon. Occupying these heights with one of the valleys made impossible would force Hezbollah's communication over a single mountain road, essentially turning it into a shooting gallery. So right now, fearsome Hezbollah is essentially just a shooting gallery for Israel to slaughter. All right, let's get a little bit here from
and
Jesse
he's just
Waters.
announced that in 2 weeks, he'll be going back to Butler, where he was almost killed. Voters across the country have just started casting their ballots. Early voting officially kicked off Friday in some states, and the lines were crazy. In Virginia, not a swing state, you could hear the Trump chants. Listen.
This is one of 3 early voting locations in Fairfax County alone. They're going to open another 13 of these locations in the beginning of October.
The Republican Party, not known for early voting, can't wait to get to the polls. As we head into the final stretch, the former president's in a good mood. Over the weekend, Trump held a rally in North Carolina and brought his secret weapons.
Make America great again. Vote for Grandpa.
Oh, he doesn't want to get off the stage. Oh, wow. Look at that. He's got the gene. Thank you. Thank you, Luke. You know, I said, say MAGA. I whispered into his ear, so cute. I said, say MAGA. He said, vote for Grandpa. He didn't care what I said. And that was actually much better, right?
And today he spent the day buying groceries for moms.
It's going to go down a little bit. It just went down $100.
Thank you so much.
We'll do that for you from the White House, all right?
Thank you.
All right, bye. Nice seeing you, everybody.
This has a 2016 feel. Then he was speaking to the silent majority, and today he's speaking to the scared majority. Writer Douglas McKinnon says this: fear.
Yeah, that's a key difference, right? The 2016 campaign was an insurgency. His 2024 campaign is to calm down the fears and make American life less scary. And question in the chat, do I think that IDF video was just Hezbollah, just propaganda? No, I think that the results on the ground showed that it's true.
Fear is real. Fear does motivate. Working class Americans do fear that elite-enabling liberal policies beyond their control are robbing them of their quality of life now and well into their future. But many of these Americans have also realized that there is one way to combat that fear and regain some of that control: by voting. Working class jobs are being gutted because politicians like Biden and Harris let our manufacturing base leave the country for cheap labor in exchange for political donations. The agricultural machine conglomerate, John Deere, an iconic American brand, has laid off hundreds of workers in the Midwest and are moving their factories to Mexico. And Biden and Harris never even tried to convince them to stay.
I just noticed behind me John Deere tractors. I know a lot about John Deere. I love the company. But as you know, they've announced a few days ago that they're going to move a lot of their manufacturing business to Mexico. I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States, so that if I win, John Deere is going to be paying a 200%.
This is vintage Trump. Cajole American companies with the threat of tariffs to remain in America, hire American, and make sure their products are made in the USA. This is why he won in 2016, and if this continues, why he win again. Putting the American people first. And American-made machines need to be run with American-made energy. Kamala Harris has always been against American energy.
I am committed to passing a Green New Deal, creating clean jobs, and finally putting an end to fracking once and for all.
Okay, let's get a burst from a Trump rally earlier today.
My name's Ernie. I'm here as a representative resident of the small town of Charleroi, PA, which you may have heard on the news here recently. Over half of our town is now filled with Haitian immigrants and illegal immigrants brought into taking our jobs away. That there is a nation-killing practice, which is brought in by the federal government and specifically the Biden-Harris administration. And I'm here with a dire warning to every American. This isn't going to stop unless we can take our country back. Under the Biden-Harris administration, 9.9 million immigrants have made it across the border since they have taken office. There is no pushback from the administration to close or seal the border, which is now affecting small-town America in my hometown of Charleroi, PA. And the biggest thing, and it's tattooed right here on my arm, we the people run this country. And we have to remember and tell the Democrats and Kamala Harris that we run this country and take it back and make America great again. Thank you.
Okay, here's some of my bookmarks. So Ta-Nehisi Coates has now turned his talents to analyzing the Arab-Israeli conflict. And so a decade ago, he was lauded as America's greatest public intellectual for his hate-filled racist rants against whites. It was considered deplorable to mention he's not very bright. Of course, back then, Steve Saylor mentioned it. So let's see, Ta-Nehisi Coates, he's now on the cover of New York Magazine. Oh, come on, man. Where's bloody Ta-Nehisi? It's just, it's absurd that people couldn't mention that Ibram X. Kendi, not very bright, that Ta-Nehisi Coates, right, not very bright. And here he is, the return of Ta-Nehisi Coates. A decade after the case for reparations, give me that. Give me that. All right, Ta-Nehisi Coates is ready to take on Israel, Palestine in the American media. All right, this is comic book man. right? His favorite kind of book is a comic book. And now he's turning his talents to trashing Israel because Israel is white, and the Palestinians are a little browner. Right? Can't get enough of this Hezbollah famous mouthpiece getting blown up while on air. And I know many people would think, oh, it shows really bad character that you would rejoice in the death of your enemies. And I just think it's stilted and inhuman to not rejoice in the death of your enemies. Right? The normal, natural, healthy thing to do is to rejoice in the death of people who want to slaughter you. You should rejoice in the death of your enemies. That's the authentic way of being a human being. What's the scariest part of working for Hezbollah? Getting promoted.
This is a village in southern Lebanon.
Okay, let me see. Oh, yes. Ta-Nehisi Coates. Palestinians equal black equals good. Israelis equal white equals bad because American slavery and stuff. More incisive thinking from Ta-Nehisi Coates. Kamala Harris is so serious about winning that she's wasting less of her campaign money on diversity, equity, inclusion, hire political consultants than is traditional. Right? Her campaign is not investing in black paid media and black political class. And the NAACP president so frustrated by this that he held a call with Harris's principal deputy campaign manager. Why aren't minority-owned political firms that typically work with Democratic campaigns getting as much campaign Harris money as white-owned firms? That's delicious. Yeah, Hezbollah currently run by everyone who last week Hezbollah thought was not good enough to deserve a pager. Brett Hume. What has emerged recently is a new type of journalist who wants less rather than more information about the most important story of the moment, who is Kamala Harris. Within 72 hours, the entire command and control staff of Hezbollah was eliminated, an unprecedented achievement for Israeli intelligence and for any counterterrorism operation. Scientific American endorsed Kamala Harris and then published that cuckoldry is good for men. Yes, Robert Nozick was ostracized by his Harvard colleagues simply because they disliked his politics. Nozick was a tenured full professor at Harvard, widely admired for his intellectual brilliance. If, despite his high standing in the profession, he still felt like a pariah in his own department, it is not hard to guess how much worse the position must be for those younger, less accomplished, and much more vulnerable scholars who share his opinion. They would be much more motivated to let their opinions be misrepresented in the left-wing direction, not to mention that many of them might, under pressure, genuinely migrate away from beliefs that sound outrageous to most of their colleagues. This is one of the mechanisms via which the high left-wing ratio reinforces itself and increases further. Most consistent thing about Joe Rogan is that he's an idiot. The Tucker Carlson, Daryl Cooper, Hitler apologetics interview is proving a useful indicator of how widespread crap epistemics are. Far too many falling for strategic disclaimers, relying on interpersonal relationships, or taking their enjoyment of his podcast to be important. And then we've got a retired brigadier general says that Vladimir Putin will be deterred by Kamala Harris because she's a black woman and the product of a mixed marriage. Daniel Schmidt, University of Chicago student, says black crime has become so normal at University of Chicago that the university police not even allowed to describe the physical appearance of the criminals because they would always say black male. University of Chicago cares more about not offending black people than protecting students. Israel takes out a wanted terror leader with no collateral damage. Israel is bad. Israel takes out communications exclusive to a terror group, brigadier commander and above, while injuring and killing overwhelmingly members of that group. Israel bad. Israel forced to fight a full-scale war in Gaza with extensive collateral damage. Israel bad. The response is the same regardless of what tactics Israel employs to fight terrorism. Then that response becomes meaningless, especially when the same people are silent about actual terrorism. According to a staffer on Kamala's 2020 run, a lot of us on the campaign realize this person should not be president of the United States. With a 91.5% turnover rate on her current VP staff, this woman should not run a lemonade stand, let alone a
Before
country.
Harris was appointed the Democrat nominee, progressive authors released a book revealing severe criticisms from her former staff. The book highlighted her struggle to articulate a coherent political vision, which left many staffers disillusioned. A top aide from her 2020 campaign remarked, "A lot of us on the campaign realized this person should not be president of the United States." Tensions within Harris's campaign were significant, especially between her sister and campaign chair Maya Harris and Juan Rodriguez, her campaign manager. The two operated from separate wings of the headquarters, holding separate meetings, leading to widespread dysfunction and reportedly financial mismanagement. While Harris claimed lack of funds as her reason for exiting the 2020 race, the book suggests that internal chaos and toxicity were also significant factors. In fact, when the state operations manager resigned in November 2019, she wrote a scathing letter stating she'd never seen an organization treat its staff so poorly. The authors argue that these issues of dysfunction and toxicity are a career-long theme that dates back to her tenure as district attorney. As VP, she's faced a staggering 91.5% staff turnover rate, including key figures like her chief of staff, communications director, and national security advisor. This has all fueled speculation about her capacity to maintain a stable team and effectively lead. A senior White House staffer stated, quote, "Kamala's not ready for prime time. She ain't made."
All right, she ain't made for this. All right, here's a few more excerpts from excellent show back at 3 p.m. Eastern from Mark Halperin.
The country in that scenario. One solution is to do what some presidents are trying to do and put Republicans in the mix for the cabinet. That would
bring in the presidential. And what's on your mind, Jim? I want to call on you because I wanted to call on you this morning, but we didn't get to you. So
Harris this year, and he said because he doesn't believe she's authentic, and I feel the same way. I just feel both parties are not authentic in any way to us. And I want to bring up one issue that
tell folks where you are who don't know where you are, who you're supporting, and what's on.
My beautiful wife is from Colombia. His anti-immigrant stance makes it very difficult in my family to even have these conversations. But the Democrats continue to gaslight me with, I don't know if anybody saw Stephanie Rule on Bill Maher on Friday, but she basically said to me, it doesn't matter whether or not she has anything to say. Donald Trump is bad, so you have to vote for Kamala Harris. And I'm sorry, between Paul Begala telling the Democratic voters it's their fault that they don't have larger majorities in Congress because they don't vote against candidates. Even Obama would do that in the late stages of his presidency into the 2016 election, telling us that, hey, the Republican candidate is bad. Don't worry about what we can't do or won't do as a governing body. Just vote against what you don't want. And the more she speaks, especially on the economy, the more it becomes evident to me that she has not at all a real good handle on what she would do, or maybe even the mechanisms of how it works. So that to me is very troubling.
Mark, thank you. Do you have a question for us today?
Yeah, well, that was going to be my question. If any of these battleground,
if any of the polls, got it.
Small durable leads.
Yeah. So let's ask Melissa and then you first. What would you need to see in the public polling? Would it just be consistency over 5, 6, 7 polls, or over 10 days? What would you need to see to say that one of the two candidates had established a durable lead?
I would say 2 weeks of polls that show someone outside the margin of error.
Even though neither of them is going to probably get outside the margin of error?
Consistently, yeah. But that would be what would convince me that a state is absolutely going in one direction or not.
Look at the crosstabs, and you saw kind of a geographic, or it could be demographic, but a geographic shift. If you saw Republicans beginning to erode the advantage that the Democrats have in the suburbs, that would be meaningful to me. Or Democrats beginning to make even slight inroads in the rural areas, that would be meaningful to me. It'd say to me, I guess I don't know if I'd describe it as a durable lead, but I would think of it as a durable trend.
Got it. Mark Ackerman, keep coming back to you make a decision. Thank you, sir.
Now, but I am a Luzerne County resident in Pennsylvania. I live in Kingston, Pennsylvania. And what else would you like to?
Who are you supporting? Who are you supporting for president? Who are you supporting for?
With what started today, or what seems to have started today with Israel and Hezbollah, is this moment in time where this is going to give the Trump campaign a better shot at winning Jewish votes, Jewish American votes?
Yep. Great question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Then obviously we don't know what will happen in the Middle East. No, can't say in a linear way, but assuming it's a challenge, and assuming the U.S. is faced with difficult decisions militarily, diplomatically, is there any way that's not politically negative for the Democrats?
No, I think it's all politically negative for the Democrats, and it's unfortunate that President Trump and others focus that on, quote, the Jewish vote. Support for Israel is one of the most enduring and unifying principles of American politics in recent years, far beyond the Jewish community. And I'm glad that President Trump is going to do better with the Jewish community than previous Republicans are. But to the extent that it's an important issue, and I think it is, it's an awful lot bigger than that. If it becomes a big issue, if Americans can start to believe that support for Israel is much more consolidated in the Republican Party than it is in the Democratic Party, which, by the way, I believe is true, I think it'll help the Republicans a lot.
Yeah. Melissa?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I also think that there's something else that's beginning to happen, which is now that we're 4 weeks back into the collegiate school year, I know that I'm starting to see on my alma mater's campus, Cornell, there's a lot of anti-Semitism that's breaking out. There's a lot of unrest on the campus. I'm getting bombarded with emails from people saying we should be calling on, federal funding to be cut. And I'm starting to wonder how much of that is going to metastasize in the next 6 weeks in the lead-in, because, one of the major reasons that Democrats helped take back the White House in 2020 was saying we're going to move away from disorder and chaos. And disorder and chaos was Trump. Well, if we switch back to a situation where everywhere you look, there appears to be disorder and chaos, setting aside Israel as an issue and what happens geopolitically here at home, if it feels like things are out of control, I think that hurts the Democratic Party as well.
Okay, thank you. Jane, come on in. Tell folks who don't know where you are, who you're supporting, and what's on your mind, please. Jane, we can't hear.
Okay, let's get some analysis here from yesterday, Israel's unprecedented operation against Hezbollah.
Yeah, and they're not mutually exclusive. One is the Israelis are trying to teach Hezbollah that there is a severe price to be paid, particularly amongst the leadership, for their actions and for their attacks on Israel. Second, it may well be now preparation for a much larger Israeli action against Lebanon, including a land invasion. I think the Israelis had been hesitant on this for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, until recently, they simply didn't have the stockpiles necessary to engage in that type of an offensive in Lebanon. And two, which is connected to one, is that they were uncertain about Lebanon's capacity to launch its substantial stockpile of missiles. I think there's a growing consensus in the IDF that they can actually move against those stockpiles and the missile forces, and that Hezbollah, because it's not a terrorist organization per se in its structure, it's a very well organized military machine that happens to use terrorism. That actually, when you take out leadership, you can throw chaos into the system. So I wouldn't all be surprised now that what the Israelis have been very wary of, for understandable reasons, primarily Israeli civilian casualties, they are probably moving in the direction of. I don't think a decision has been made on that yet. And I do think the estimates of civilian casualties you hear from IDF folks, which usually range somewhere between 700 and 1,500 dead Israelis, that is civilians, that would come from missile strikes until the Israeli Air Force were able to put those out of action. That has.
So Steve Taylor's up with a great new blog post. America's former greatest intellectual takes a risk. Some centrist Jewish intellectuals with complex but supportive ideas about Israel might finally notice that Ta-Nehisi Coates isn't all that bright. So we've got a long essay here in New York Magazine, The Return of Ta-Nehisi Coates, once among the most prolific political and social commentators in the U.S. Ta-Nehisi Coates has been quiet for the last decade. Next week, he's turning up the volume again with the release of his new book, The Message. Central among the truths he's going to reveal is Israel's violent, decades-long subjugation of Palestinians. Now, Steve Saylor comments, I believe that what's going on in the Holy Land beginning October 7, 2023 is horrible, and I wish it would stop, but I don't have any solutions. I encourage those who feel that they do know the right thing to do, including Ta-Nehisi Coates, to debate the subject in public. I suspect, however, right, and anyone with real expertise in the Middle East, right, they speak multiple languages. They're very smart. So can you imagine Ta-Nehisi Coates going up against people with high IQs? Right, Ta-Nehisi Coates will soon discover just how sacralized and off-limits to criticism he had been a decade ago when he was almost universally lauded in the prestige press for his racist anti-white writings. Back then, nobody was supposed to mention that he's not very bright, for a famous public intellectual, because his hate, warped, racist nonsense was considered a good thing because he was just demonizing whites. Now, however, Ta-Nehisi has gotten up his courage to punch sideways, black versus Jew, rather than straight down, black versus white. So we shall see whether he gets as shamefully, universally ecstatic of a reception now as he did earlier in the Great Awakening. That should be fun.
It's a breaking effect, but I think there is a shift inside of Israel that they can't allow essentially 10% of their territory to go unoccupied.
You mentioned the two options here. One is the potential of a larger operation. Some critics, Twitter critics online, said, "Why would you waste such a sophisticated operation that took obviously many years to put in place, this pager operation, without simultaneously striking at that moment?" Is that perhaps because we don't know what Israel has planned?
I mean, if the calculation is to intimidate and also to soften, which I believe it is, then at any time that you take those out, works to your advantage. It takes a long time to prepare someone to become a Hezbollah leader, to have the necessary skill set. It's not just simply round robin. You don't get to lose one, someone replaces him. I think that's true.
Right. This is Reuel Marc Gerecht, right? Former Iranian-targets officer in the CIA, current fellow at the Foundations of the Defense of Democracy. He writes many essays published in the Wall Street Journal op-ed page.
For someone at the bottom of the totem pole, it's not true for someone at the top. And I think the Israelis are just, instilling fear, once again, that they're capable of a lot more. And they want to see if they can intimidate the Hezbollah leader.
Yeah, Israel has regained escalation dominance, and Hezbollah has just been Israel's bitch. And I'm not even, Iran has just been Israel's bitch. And I'm not even sure that Hezbollah and Iran have the intelligence and the capability to be anything other than Israel's bitch right now.
Leadership into ceasing and desisting, and its missile attacks on northern Israel. I don't think that's possible without an invasion, but I suspect the Israelis will test it for the reasons I mentioned, and that is, even if they go through with it, even if it's a significant success, they're still probably going to have a few hundred Israeli civilians die.
Speaking of the pager operation and the walkie-talkie operation in particular, can you put that in some historical context? I mean, you were in the CIA, you're aware of past operations. To me, it's my lifetime one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, operationally.
I want to thank you all for being here. And now, who am I introducing next?
Sleepy Joe.
Who's next?
It's the leader of India, of 1.2 billion people.
Distinguished guests, the Prime Minister of the Republic of India.
After 4 years of this, the press lost its patience.
But there's going to be plenty of opportunities. It's not like we're not allowing all of you to see many other things that are going to develop throughout the day. I mean, I just went through them. A quad family photo. He's going to take them to his high school.
One photo ops. That's what you've created. They're not a press conference, which we would prefer.
What baffles people in this room, especially for those who are watching this and wondering why on earth do we harp on these kinds of things, what baffles us is this is a president who from day one committed to be the most transparent president possible.
This is the same group of people who up until the bitter end swore that Joe Biden had another 4 years in him. Kamala did too. She was one of the chief architects of the Biden cover-up. And now that he's on the way out, the press is now covering for her.
And there was not one question about this during the ABC debate.
But if we see Dr. Jill in the Situation Room, there's going to be a big problem. Senator Ted Cruz joins me now. It's
all right, let's get more here on Israel versus Hezbollah.
Pretty bloody good. I mean, obviously they got a hold of all the information that Hezbollah needed to, order new pagers. It's fun. It's amusing in the sense that one of the reasons Hezbollah moved to pagers was to get away from cell phones, which they believed were more easily tracked. So they probably, I don't know when they ordered those pagers, but they probably did it in a manner, obviously, that was sufficiently open so the Israelis could discover it. And then they intercepted those pagers, I suspect, at the source, and rigged them.
I read
good operation. I mean, there's no chance on earth that the agency could have pulled off a similar action.
Well, I read, and it's obviously all this is preliminary information and may not turn true, that they actually operated a pager company for many years and were actually selling legitimate pagers to other, I mean, I don't know who's using pagers now, but selling legitimate pagers to other organizations waiting for the moment, or maybe trying to push Hezbollah to the moment where Hezbollah needs to order a lot of pagers.
I mean, that wouldn't surprise me. I think it'd be interesting to look at, Beirut Communications and see if there have been any shifts in technology, upgrading software, et cetera, that opened up the opportunity for Mossad.
So what could possibly stop Israel just pounding the heck out of Hezbollah and Hamas? And Professor David Bernstein, law professor, says perhaps if Hamas released the hostages and surrendered, Israel's even willing to let the leadership be exiled rather than jailed or killed, and Hezbollah stopped permanently lobbing missiles daily at civilians and making war on Israel, the war could end. It's not that complicated, right? When Hezbollah and Hamas and Iran are tired of being Israel's bitch, maybe they will wise up.
To do what it did.
Why did you say that you don't believe the CIA would have the capability of doing that now?
It's one, just the political overtones of this would be too much for the CIA to handle. So it would be kicked up to the White House, and there it would be lawyered to death, and then you would have the operational details of having to deploy essentially a covert action team long enough to manage this, It's just too long and involved, I suspect, for the agency to do. The agency is, for the most part, really out of covert action, because to do anything of any significance that costs any money, now this may have been a low-cost op, it requires bipartisan support, it requires congressional support, and people can't leak on you. So if there's anywhere in that chain of command that people don't want to do this, they'll simply leak it, and that's the end of it.
Do you believe that Israel had to have, would this be the type of operation you'd have to have human intelligence on the ground? People.
I mean, there certainly was a component part. I mean, I think the Israelis could have picked up a lot via intercept, and they're pretty good at intercept. They're not nearly as good as we are, but they're not bad, particularly if it's a tactical intercept where they can go position things inside of Beirut, which I'm sure they do. So they may have picked it up that way, but I suspect that there was also some human sources involved.
Would that mean that people within the organization Hezbollah have turned, or could that be Lebanese who are frustrated and upset that Hezbollah has become such a force in the country are now trying to help Israel?
In this particular instance, it could have been either. This didn't require, serious penetration.
So a famous professor, Michael Walzer, the author of a book on just and unjust war, has declared that Israel's pager attack on Hezbollah was unjust war and a violation of international humanitarian law.
Between a completely legitimate strike against terrorist army.
All right, this is Commentary Magazine, John Podhoretz and company.
And actual, laws of war was pretty baffling to me, though I guess not really surprising.
Well, how dare you? How dare you question? How dare you question
I know.
the author of a book called Just and Unjust Wars? He wrote a book called Just and Unjust Wars. And
That's all it takes, apparently.
You have the right. You have the right to question the absolute authority of his judgment.
I'm going to write a book called Right and Wrong by Matthew Continetti, and then I will get the appointment at the Institute for Advanced Study, and the New York Times and Atlantic will come to me and say, Mr. Continetti, what
years the idea was, well, John Rawls is our foremost moral philosopher of justice because he wrote the theory of justice.
Clearly, I'm wasting my time on this podcast. I need to get to work on my track, which will set me up for the rest of my life.
Yes, I would like to read from Michael Walzer, again, the author of the Just and Unjust Wars. And yes, for some reason, Michael Walzer gets a lot of credit from people in our camp because as he is a socialist, former editor of Dissent magazine and a Princeton philosopher, the fact that he didn't immediately go and live in an encampment and said some things in the pages of Dissent suggesting that Israel attacked on October 7th without any casus belli was actually in the right to respond was some heroic act of moral clarity on the part of this leftist figure. Let us just share a few words from Michael Walzer, the author of Just and Unjust Wars, to see where he comes down.
Okay, let me just give you a little bit more background here on Michael Walzer. He's professor emeritus at Princeton University's Institute for Advanced Study, and he explained why anti-immigrant populism is more a European problem than an American one. There is one decisive moment in American history, he says, which is not much written about, but which is very important, and it sets up a contrast with Europe. That moment is the moment when the Anglo-American settlers, who thought that they were becoming an Anglo-American state, allowed themselves to become a minority in what they thought was their country. That happened in the course of the 19th century, with lots of resistance, resentment, nativist movements, hostility to immigrants, but it happened. And instead of America becoming an Anglo-American nation state, America became a nation of nationalities, without a majority nation and with an ongoing immigration. Right? That moment is not going to be repeated in Europe. Right? Cultural pluralism. That's the great contribution of the United States of America. Thank you, Michael Walzer. All right, let's get John Podhoretz back.
Down on this. Yes, the devices most probably were being used by Hezbollah operatives for military purposes. This might make them a legitimate target in the continuous cross-border battles between Israel and Hezbollah. Oh, the continuous cross-border battles between Israel and Hezbollah. You mean where Hezbollah is firing at Israel without...
Yeah, just cross-border battles. That's all they are. Right, Hamas comes in, slaughters 1,200 Israelis, just a cross-border battle, and then Hezbollah, for no reason, just decides to start shelling Israel after the Hamas attack on October 8th, just a cross-border battle. Cultural pluralism, guys, great American achievement here. Michael Walzer will tell us what happened. Beautiful. Cultural pluralism. Don't you love it? It's an American achievement from Princeton, right? This is why anti-immigrant populism is not really an American thing, right? This is just some aberrant reaction in Europe. It's not going to repeat itself in America.
There is one
It's from 10 years
decisive
ago.
moment in American history, which isn't much written about, but which seems to be very important, and it does set up a contrast with Europe. And then you have to work sort of against the contrast. But that moment is the moment when the Anglo-American settlers, who thought that they were establishing an Anglo-American state, allowed themselves to become a minority in what they thought was their country. And that happened in the course of the 19th century with a lot of resistance, resentment, nativist movements, hostility to immigrants.
The decisive moment in American history, I think he might be right there, by Jove.
Any prior reason in a war that Israel does not seek and is attempting not to fight? Oh, I see. So it's a just war issue because they're at war together, whereas in fact Hezbollah is making war against Israel, and Israel is not responding to Hezbollah. Okay, but the attack.
No, I don't think you could call Michael Walzer a realist, but most realists in international relations are left of center, 90% of them.
Came when the operatives were not operating. They had not been mobilized and they were not militarily engaged. Rather, they were at home with their families, sitting in cafes, shopping in food markets, among civilians who were randomly killed and injured. The theory of just war depends heavily on the distinction between combatants and civilians. Blah, 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 blah. Terrorists are always on the battlefield. That's the whole point of asymmetrical terrorist warfare. A terrorist doesn't wear a uniform. A terrorist is not engaged militarily in combat. That is what terrorism is: a turn, a twist, a gambit around. A Hezbollah terrorist is never off duty. A Hezbollah terrorist can be activated at a single moment. He does not wear a uniform. He is not in a military formation. He's not under a tent where somebody is playing Yankee Doodle on a banjo. There is no supply chain. Terrorists live in civilian populations. That's where they fight out of. And the idea that they are ever demobilized is itself a stain on just war theory, which is based on the idea that you can tell the difference between soldiers and civilians. The whole point of Hezbollah is to make it impossible to tell the difference.
It's like this immaculate conception theory of conflict. As soon as Israel defends itself, the intellectuals look up and go, we're in there's war, this war that Israel is fighting. It just appeared. The war just appeared. There's no reference to who begins the war, whether it's Hamas attacking Israel on October 7th, when there had been a ceasefire the day before, or whether it's Hezbollah launching rockets into Israel beginning on October 8th. A rocket that, 6 weeks ago, one rocket hit a playground, a Druze playground in the north of Israel and killed children. And here we have the most precise, amazing espionage, sabotage operation in the history of armed conflict, where it all goes to the pagers that Hezbollah hands out to the Hezbollah operatives, and somehow this is Israel's fault.
Look, the Trojan horse, obviously, clearly a violation of the rules of just war.
And where did the Trojan war begin? It began when the horse showed up. We don't even know what happened with Penelope.
Yeah, and the killing of bin Laden too.
Helen, sorry.
Yeah,
and the killing of bin Laden. He was just hanging out at the bottom, watching videos.
Wasn't a combatant. Saddam wasn't a combatant.
It was after 5. Right. I mean, the thing is, that's what his GChat status said.
Things of ISIS. Even if you if we pretend to believe in this idea that you shouldn't hit terrorists during off hours, this was hardly downtime for Hezbollah. They've been extraordinarily busy being Hezbollah for a year now. Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is lunacy.
Yeah, well, this is part of what makes these things what makes the terrorist group so effective at getting advocates in the West, because they are cowards. They're never. I mean, Hamas on October 7th was the exception to the rule, right? But they're never just like gathering information and then riding into battle. That's not what they do. That's why asymmetric warfare is not symmetric warfare. That's why all these things have different terms for them for what we're doing, because they are not, in armed formation, but they've been shooting rockets, as you said, for ever. And so what do you consider a soldier at war? And is Israel, does Israel have to check like the resume of every guy like they have in Hamas? Like this guy from Al Jazeera turns out to be, commander in the tank thing. Like that's what makes them so effective, is that if you fall into their trap, you can never hit them. That's the trap.
All right. What should Israel do with Lebanon and protect its northern front?
But at the same time, look what is actually happening. Hezbollah is using its own people as human shields, and most of the assets of Hezbollah that are based in the villages or in Beirut were not attacked. They are still intact.
So the Biden administration was planning to take down Hezbollah because Hezbollah is primarily funded by its international drug trade. But then the Biden administration backed off in service of its Iran appeasement policy.
See this by the amount of casualties in Lebanon. It is clear that as long as Lebanese population is not leaving its towns and villages, it will not get hurt from missiles that are not being launched by the IDF. IDF is targeting areas which are open areas and very, very little other things. So it means that many of the assets of Hezbollah still exist and still threatening us. We need to deal with that as well. And there are a few ways to do it. You mentioned Khulata, they talked about the long-range missiles array. This missile array is based mainly in Beirut, in the dense areas of Beirut. I think there are a few more options, not instead, but more. First, the fact that we got the highest commanders of Hezbollah is extremely important to the capability to function of this organization. And as long as there are operational opportunities, this is highly important to continue to do that. Second, I think that part of the main sources of power of Hezbollah is the civilian infrastructure of Hezbollah. This is a state within a state. And the state within a state of Hezbollah is part of terror, is part of the mechanism of terror. It is financing terror, it is enabling terror, it is enabling Hezbollah to make the Lebanese human shields, creating a cover, indoctrination of hate. And it is very important to threaten that as well. Whether it's finance, services, or energy, whatever, that actually push the Lebanese state.
Right, great video here with a detailed program for taking down Hezbollah. Let's get some analysis here.
Plan, to borrow the official phrase, to change the balance of power with Hezbollah to affect Hezbollah's calculus. What is new about what we're seeing?
In order to have a better understanding about that, let me start by saying that we are going to focus this evening on Hezbollah. And as we speak, things are unfold in Lebanon. And over here, suddenly, what was just published by Jinsa become literally reality. But everything is orchestrated, as we know, from Iran. So in the last 11 months, we discussed here, most of our sessions, Hamas. And today we are going to discuss the most significant element that was built by Iran for different purposes. And in order to understand its importance, we should take a close look at what have happened in the last 11 months and how important they were, and what have happened in the last, I would say, 7 days to a series of activities. And I mentioned some of them we won't be able to discuss, and the majority is and to allow the residents of the North back to their houses. There are different ways that it can be implemented, partially or in a very comprehensive way.
And we have increasing number of reports that Yahya Sinwar was killed over the weekend, right? Don't have that definitively yet.
Yet to be decided. We were trying to disconnect Hezbollah from what have happened in the south without too much success, although we had a very significant operational success over there. More than 500 operatives, Hezbollah operatives, were eliminated in the last 11 months. This is prior all the other attacks that took place. And still, strategically speaking, it didn't fulfill the strategic goal. And that's why we are in a new situation right now, and the rest is yet to be seen.
Thank you, General Aish. General Amadroid, I'd like to turn to you.
Okay, comment in the chat. If your side says that there is no morality in war and total war is reality, neither side should criticize the others for war crimes. First of all, nobody says that there's no morality in war, right? Not many thoughtful people say that, but it has to be placed in the context of you fighting for survival, and is the killing of civilians needless? Is it an inevitable accompaniment of going after the enemy? So there's been a long tradition that in war, that the population of a state will suffer the consequences of whatever happens to the state. But it's long been thought for centuries that you should minimize how much you kill civilians, right? So with Hezbollah and Hamas, they target civilians. With countries like Israel and the United States, they seek generally to minimize civilian casualties with varying degrees of effectiveness. But if you don't survive, all right, then it doesn't really matter how moral you are in war. So there's a time and a place for considering morality, and there's a time and a place for just considering conditions on the ground and what's necessary for your survival. And because you have one conversation about reality without consideration of morality doesn't mean morality is pointless. It means that, first of all, we need to have a conversation about facts on the ground. What's the reality? What do we need to do to survive and to prosper? Then you can have an additional conversation. Can we do what we need to do to survive and prosper and minimize death to civilians? And the way that Israel conducted its operation in Gaza, it considerably minimized death to civilians. Israel killed about 18,000 members of Hamas and killed less than or approximately 30,000 civilians. So the combatant to civilian ratio is pretty close to an all-time low. If Kamala has so much money, why is she still fundraising in San Francisco 6 weeks out of the election? I don't know about Kamala, but I know that I often just want to do the things that I want to do, the things that come naturally to me. And Kamala is an inside player. Kamala's probably pretty good at fundraising. She's not necessarily a great politician, and she's quite awkward out mixing with regular people. But when she's working the inside game, right, that seems to be what she does best. And so she's doing what she does best rather than the things that will help her win the presidency. Let's bring Kip back to the show. Kip, what's going on, man?
Hey, buddy, did you have a good week?
I did.
Good, good. I was just kind of checking into you. As I was listening to tonight's show, the thought that kept occurring to me, because I'm kind of weird, is that all throughout time, it seems like a lot of places like Babylon and like that area where they're having a lot of wars now, and like even the ancient Greeks, seems like it all turns to shit when they use up their natural resources. You ever notice that?
Yeah, that's a perennial problem when people don't take care of their topsoil. When people despoil the land, it's a major concern with the Torah to preserve the trees, the fruit-bearing trees, and to try to preserve the environment. So the wise people preserve their environment, don't rape it.
I imagine those glorious cedars that they used to talk about in antiquity all throughout Syria and Lebanon, all gone now, right?
I'm not sure.
But whatever they've done, it's led to desertification, you know? So, and also I noticed through history, you know, Babylon, the Greeks, wherever, not only does it turn to shit when they use up all their wood and whatnot, but also so much of it seems to end in slavery. You know what I mean? There towards the end, they all become debt slaves or just out and out slaves.
Well, slavery is almost the natural human condition. When people can't protect themselves, it seems to be a default that you become a slave, right? People become slaves to drugs and to alcohol. And then if your people is simply not proficient at preserving itself, then it seems to be the way of all flesh that you do become a slave. But going back to the desertification, something that Israel did that was amazing, that it made the desert bloom. And when you fly over Israel and its neighbors, it's amazing to see the far greater success that Israel's had with making the desert bloom compared with its neighbors. Back to you, Kip.
Oh, yeah. Well, it just, you can tell, like, even from the time of Babylon, something about city life. Apparently that you've heard those, especially Arabic people talk about asabia, or however they say it, that connectiveness that a tribe has when they're out, you know, on their own as a small tribe. But when they go into the cities, that's when they start coveting each other's wives and livestock and, you know, carts or whatever they have. And it just seems to bring out the worst in people. You got anything to say about that?
Yeah, it's true. You also have anonymity, right? You couldn't have a pornography industry flourishing in some rural environment, right? You need the anonymity of the city, and if you want to have sexual promiscuity All right, you want to be in the city, but I don't think the environment's the primary issue. Orthodox Jews keep most of their children virgins until they marry, and Orthodox Jews overwhelmingly live in cities. So it can degrade, but there are many impressive peoples in cities. There are many impressive cities. So yeah, there's probably some tendencies in that direction.
Yeah, yeah. It just if you are, and a lot of people are, the rich people, the richer they are, the more they can get involved in whatever vice they can finance, whatever vice, And if you've ever noticed, the cities are where they can get their hands on whatever it is, whatever their vice is. So it just it has that negative effect, I guess, overall. But generally, I don't know. I've rolled around to basically the same line of thinking. In 2007, 8, and 9, I got to watching the election and whatnot, and it just felt like everything was like one big con, And then, so I had kind of tuned out of a lot of that stuff and kind of just went back into my, mystic monk type of lifestyle. And then, of course, you can't live in just that. So I check into the world. And of course, I checked into the Luke Ford show, and your charisma had me, falling into the current event shit again. You know what I mean? Against my better judgment. You get, and so I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions, and get your take, because you can probably tell where I'm going with this. If I'm already telling you, I kind of think everything that we see around us is like one big con. But let's just talk about, instead of talking about Kip's reality, let's talk about Luke Ford's reality. And would you give a yes or no to the fact that Luke Ford's reality is or may be fundamentally fictional?
I would say no. And I would say that people who are honest with themselves do not live in a fictional world, because they can immediately tell when other people are operating a con. Because when something doesn't make sense and you're honest with yourself, all right, then you just immediately pick up when other people are lying to you and trying to manipulate you. So if you're not able to immediately pick up when people are lying to you and deceiving you and running a con, then in all likelihood, you're not being honest with yourself. And I think I'm pretty honest with myself. And so I I see through the bullshit.
Right. And one thing is when you, for example, you were talking about face-to-face encounters.
Yeah.
If I'm running a con on you, you'll be able to detect little things. I'm talking about me personally. I'm giving you a little something about myself that I have to try really hard to look you in the eye when I know that I'm doing something, or you get what I'm saying? The subject matter that we've broached in our discussion is something that's against your better judgment, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's good for me, but it's bad for you. There's the thing that a Luke Ford has to detect. Hey, wait a minute, he just looked away from me. And now when we talked about baseball, he's giving me dead eye contact again. What's going on here? So I believe, like I've told you before, that there's a little something in us that's in this world, but there's also a little something that's within us that's not in this world. And that's the part that can't trick the lie detector test, and that's the part that the reason I can't look you in the eye if I'm getting ready to pull some shit on you. But so I don't want you to think I was trying to attack you personally. It's just, if Luke knows one person in the whole fucking world, it's Luke, right? So I'm using this as an example. So you're saying, no, your reality is not fundamentally fictional, but then I would say, is your reality is probably actually a construct of narratives and experiences that you've developed over time. So you got those experiences that you've lived, you've seen that real, but you've also got a construct of narratives that have been thrown at you over time. Would you say that's true?
Yes, but there's something more important than the constructive narratives that are received over time, and that is my genetics, right? Genetics is more important than all these things. We are not born a blank slate. We are born with genetic predispositions, right? There are many traits that I have that were foreshadowed with my Irish anti-British ancestor who escaped from 3 British jails, Michael Dwyer, back in the 18th century, early 19th century. All right, so my genetics is the most important thing that shapes how I view the world. Then my socialization, right? And then the final and the weakest of all those factors is my reason.
Would guys like Steven Pinker still want to mud wrestle you over?
No,
that,
they'd agree with what I just said.
They've come off that.
Well, Steven
over the
Pinker
time?
wrote a book debunking the blank slate, and there was one
Okay,
other
okay.
thing.
He was con. He wasn't pro. 10-4 on that.
Yeah.
But I know there's a whole. They built. This is one of the things that they've built a whole narrative around. You know, and you have to try to poke holes at it. So I guess where I'm coming from is I'm kind of saying whoever controls those stories, those narratives, controls Luke's reality, and you would probably say no to that as well,
Yeah,
right?
definitely would say no to that, because even idiots did not evolve to be gullible. And there's one other thing that I want to pick up on what you said. If you're about to do something heinous, all right, you are going to have a lot more tension, and that tension is going to ripple through your face, your musculature, the way you move, and the way you sound. And if you're honest with yourself, then you should be able to pick up that someone else is not at ease with themselves. People have to gird themselves up before doing something heinous. And if you're someone who is honest with himself and doesn't have a whole lot of unnecessary tension, you'll immediately detect when other people are incredibly inappropriately tense.
Right. You'll be like, why is Kip singing falsetto all of a sudden? What the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
But I would also say, I would contend maybe that Luke will feel societal pressure if he goes against the grain, you know, losing friends, relationship, you know, those connections you're always so big on. Where does that come into play?
Yeah, well, you should know what's socially acceptable. So I don't say things that are unpopular in the most offensive way. All right, I try to phrase them in a way to maximize their effectiveness. So people should not gratuitously offend social proprieties, because then you just hack away at your social ties. You have to take into account other people's reality and other people's narratives and other people's hero systems. So if there's a majority religion, it's not a good idea for members of a minority religion to openly and publicly mock the majority religion. And if a majority religion is wokeness, then it's generally not going to be a good idea in your work life or when you're in public spaces to just needlessly mock the majority religion. So you have to take other people into account. You have to take dominant narratives into account and use some sophistication when you subvert them.
So I get what you're saying. Because everybody's different, you're saying that you can see through the bullshit, and that's the same thing you always challenge people on. You realize that, right?
Yeah, except I believe they are deluding themselves. Right? I make very clear that I think they are deluding themselves because, to begin with, they are not honest with themselves. Right? Well, I make the foundation of this show my own flaws, and then because I've experienced so many things that warp the way I see the world, when I spot those same characteristics in others, I can name it.
Well, I remember you saying that you lost portion of your audience due to your thoughts on COVID, and then the one show of yours maybe I checked out in the past week, you kept saying something about people slaughtering people in Charlottesville, and that was something that I really didn't. On one hand, I didn't.
No. Definitely, the alt-right didn't slaughter people in Charlottesville. One person, but that was the first time someone who could be tied to the alt-right could be tied to killing someone. But there were people in the alt-right who then went on to slaughter people in mosques in Christchurch, right? The death toll was well over 50. And then there was a Walmart in South Texas where the death toll was over 20. And then there was a supermarket in Buffalo where the death toll was over 10. So the alt-right was not slaughtering people at Charlottesville, but it was the first time that we had a documented member who could be attributed to the alt-right who could be then criminally convicted of murdering someone. But then there was a whole bunch of slaughter in Christchurch, New Zealand, in a Walmart in South Texas, and a supermarket in Buffalo.
I get what you're saying now, because okay, what you're saying is, you were saying slaughtering people. You were saying that event was shortly followed by a couple of things that were people instead of person.
Yeah.
Now, so that the person that got run over, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
and the guy who did it was convicted of murder.
Well, what would now this is just you and me. What would you do if you were in one of those situations where a demonstration has just broke out at UCLA and you see all them damn wild-eyed people with the spittle in the corner of their mouth and they've surrounded your car? Are you going to plow somebody over, or are you going to sit there and be on the news as the next victim? What would Luke do in that situation?
Well, unless they were breaking into the car, right, and I had a valid reason to be in fear for my life because they were smashing my windows and breaking into the car, right? Otherwise, I would not start running over people. But once they start breaking into my car so that I had a legally valid reason for being in fear of my life, then I'd get out of there, even if that meant running over the people who were trying to kill me.
Right. You give them about 3 or 4 good honks and then get the F out of there, right?
No, it depends on if they're breaking my windows. If they're breaking my windows, then I have a legally valid reason to fear for my life, and then I would get out of there.
Right. I don't know. Events that seem to happen, I guess, from about Derek Chauvin onwards, I think would make many white people like second guess themselves, and they would wind up as a statistic. I don't know what that percentage is, but you would agree there's some percentage there that has gotten scared away after they saw what the hell happened to the McCloskeys, or they
Right.
saw what happened with the barefoot jogger. Not only did they get the 2 guys, they got the 3rd guy that just happened to capture it on camera. It's getting weird
Right.
out
So
there.
you have to know your environment. You have to know what the leaning is in your city or your town or in your country area. You have to know how the police and the district attorney are going to prosecute. You have to make your decisions based on that, and you have to know what is the zeitgeist, and that's
Mm-hmm.
going to affect how you operate. The McCloskeys were ill-advised to point their weapons at this group. They should have stayed in their house, just like I would stay in my car, right? I would stay behind locked doors. Then, if the mob starts breaking in, we're in a completely different situation. But the McCloskeys and a lot of other people gratuitously pull out their weapons and start waving them around, and I think that's ill-advised.
Right. I mean, I didn't necessarily see the video, but like my impression of what happened with him is maybe the dude just tell him, keep it moving, stay on your pathway, and
While
don't come over
waving a
here
gun
looking for
at them,
bullets.
all right? When you point a gun at someone, that is a very serious thing that you should not do needlessly. And the McCloskeys needlessly pointed their weapons at the crowd. That they would come out of their house waving their guns was insane, particularly given the political predispositions of law enforcement in their area.
Now, when you started running that line of thinking, it got me thinking about poor Kyle Rittenhouse running for his life.
Right. Well, Kyle Rittenhouse made valid decisions, right? He killed
Mhm.
people who were about to do him grievous bodily harm, and that's why Kyle Rittenhouse was not convicted of murder. And that's why that Hispanic dude who shot Trayvon Martin was not convicted of murder, because they were legally in the right.
I don't believe in hell, but I wish there was a hell for somebody like that Gabe Grosskreutz, who sat there and tried to sue Rittenhouse, and then when he saw that his run of bullshit wasn't being agreed to, he ended up, didn't he change his name?
I don't know. I don't remember.
That was one of the guys that Rittenhouse ended up shooting. But anyway, as far as that control and the narratives, I mean, just somebody like Larry Elder, you remember when he took a run at the governorship here a couple
Yes.
years ago during that recall?
Yes.
Do you see the way they was able to like subvert the truth with that whole narrative, or do you agree with the media that he was the basically the most racist black man? What did they call him? The black face of white supremacy?
Yeah.
That was
I
LA
did.
Times front page.
Yeah. I didn't pay that much attention. So
So,
if you're going to run for public office, if you're going to make yourself a public figure, people will say unfair things about you. All right, whether you're on the left or the right.
right. Well, even the Biden Ukraine bribe possibilities and all this kind of stuff. Even when they found out that the laptop was not a hoax, I didn't see anybody. I didn't see 2020. I didn't see none of them running out there doing those exposés. Did you? So I'll stand by my contention that there's just a bunch of narratives being run, but I will at least say this. Sometimes they get exposed in almost real time now. And I can say it gives me hope, because previously, Luke, from about 2009 to now, I thought the only way that people would ever catch on to anything is like a bunch of Buddhas just break out into America. And I know that it is so not going to happen in the land of consumerism that I had given up on any hope of that. But at the same time, something about modern media helps us expose, 20% of them, 18% of them, whatever it is. It's so blatant. It's so blatant. All they can do is put a Band-Aid over it, but the scab never heals. And slowly but surely, I think everybody's losing faith in the media. What say you on that as we kind of close this out for the night?
I don't think you should have a tremendous amount of faith and emotions wrapped up in things that you can't control. Like if you lose hope and lose faith in national media, then your priorities are out of whack. You shouldn't get emotionally invested in things way beyond yourself like that. And so the dominant institutions in this country, including the dominant cultural and media institutions, are on the left, and that's the way it is. And the wise man does not get emotionally invested in the humiliation and defeat of forces and institutions that are a million times more powerful than he is.
If you can't tell by now in our 2 months of discussions, it ain't them I'm so mad at. It's my brethren here in America that can't see through the bullshit. You get what I'm saying? And on one level, you don't want to believe what they say about IQs and how dumb the average guy is. But by God, it's out there in their face. It's out there in their face. And somebody like Joe Biden still gets 81 million votes in an election. It's hard for me to take, but I've kept you long enough, buddy. Good show as always, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah,
All right,
so
see you, bud.
This is why it's so much more important to view the world through the lens of trying to understand, through just a lens of awareness rather than trying to change the world. You will just get furious when other people don't see things the way you do, and there is no happy ending to that trajectory. On the other hand, if you invest yourself in understanding why is it that 81 million Americans voted for Joe Biden, right? Number one, right, there was a lot of reason to believe that Donald Trump was chaotic, and they did not want Donald Trump dominating the news for the next 4 years. And there were reasons to believe that Joe Biden would lead a centrist, more competent direction for America. So just understand why people have left-wing preferences, all right? Our political preferences are overwhelmingly genetic. Maybe not overwhelmingly, but substantially. And then the other component to our preferences are simply the way we were socialized. So our own unaided human reason doesn't really account for much when compared to the power of genetics and the power of socialization. So I want to understand Hitler. I want to understand Chairman Mao. I want to understand Joe Biden. I want to understand Kamala Harris. I want to understand Joseph Stalin. Right? I primarily want to understand. And so I seek to understand far more than I seek that you understand me. Right? I want to understand the world beyond me, more than make the world beyond me understand me. And I am far more invested in understanding than in changing. I'm not much of a political activist. I have my preferences and I wear them on my sleeve, but I'm not particularly invested in my preferences. I'll admit, right? My emotions overcome me. I've got a hero system, right? I get feelings when Donald Trump won the presidency in 2016. I think it may have been the happiest day of my life. It was just so hilarious that all the elites were wrong. I got a good question from a friend today who watched the show yesterday, and he says, just wondering about your show yesterday, your interpretation of Israel. The header for my show yesterday was, will Israel humiliate Hezbollah into submission? Have you even personally had a conflict that you resolved by beating your opponent so badly they submitted, and you somehow resolved this conflict by beating them? And yes, right, I've broken a lot of stories that ended the careers of many rabbis who are doing things that they should not have done. So I've broken stories that ended the public careers of a lot of people doing bad things, and then resolving conflicts by beating my opponent. I've cut people out of my life, right? If you cut someone out of your life, right, that's what Israel's trying to do to Hezbollah. They want to cut Hezbollah out of the lives of Israelis. If you've broken up with someone, right? I've broken up with romantic partners. I've broken up with girlfriends, right? That's what Israel wants to do. It wants to break up with Hezbollah, just end the relationship, end Israel's vulnerability to Hezbollah, just like I wanted to end my vulnerability to people I concluded were bad for me, were not good for me, were dragging me down, were mentally unstable, were just too unpredictable. I just found I didn't like them. So if you cut someone out of your life, right? If you break up with someone, if you fire someone, or if you've been fired, right? The act of firing is a humiliation for the person being fired, and that ends the relationship, right? That's it. You're out of there. And your employer may at some point in the future regret what he did, but it's highly, highly, highly unlikely that he'll ever say that and then hire you back. I know that I have had fantasies that employers who fired me recognized the error of their ways. And they said, Luke, please come back. We were wrong. You can take it out all on me. I was wrong, and I just can't operate my business without you. But that's silly thinking. So there are all sorts of ways that people routinely just get rid of other people from their life, by breaking up, by just cutting them out of your life, or just by firing them. And that's what Israel's trying to do with Hezbollah. End the relationship, right? End this back and forth that's been going on. End this violent spiral, and create a safe, strong Israel, and let Israel's enemies know that they will get thrashed and humiliated if they try to re-enter Israel. So yeah, I think we've all had the experience of conflicts where we afterwards decided, I'm just going to cut that person out of my life. Or if I can't cut the person out of my life, I'm just going to gray rock them. I'm not going to share myself with them. I'm going to keep my interactions with them to a minimum. I'm not going to react to them, right? Or you just get rid of the relationship. You get rid of that employee, or you quit that job and you take a better job. Or if you're in a bad situation, you move, or you realize you need to get help. So you enter a 12-step program, you enter therapy, you develop a new community, you develop a new life, you develop a new set of